Hey everyone. Eddie, you've joined twice, it seems. All right. Hey everyone. Thank you for joining the Left Hook. I'm here with Professor Eddie Glaude. We're both allegedly on vacation, but no, we're not because life, to quote Robert Frost, it must go on. And there's so much breaking news. And I appreciate Eddie taking time out as he's with his family to join me. I look like this for those who don't know because I'm with my in-laws in Florida, surrounded by 800 kids. So I apologize, but bear with me. There's so much news. We saw Zohran Mamdani win yesterday, defeat a sexual predator, son of Muslim African immigrants, named Zoran, was able to overcome the entire, if you will, arsenal of the establishment to defeat Andrew Cuomo, a sexual predator. But even in the face of obscene racism and Islamophobia, and we're going to talk about how it's going to get worse, we see Mahmoud Khalil, who finally was able to be reunite with his child after spending 104 days in detention for the crime of being Palestinian. We're seeing this war on Iran, the strikes done by Donald Trump, completely illegal, and the drumbeat to war and all the neocon hawks with their, pardon my language, war boners. And we're seeing ICE and the military literally terrorize Americans and brown people instead of, the threats. And I believe that there's a common theme here. I believe there's a common thread, something that I've been talking about for a long time, something that Professor Eddie Glaude has been talking about for a long time, is America's imperialism and its establishment needs racism and Islamophobia in order to function. And Professor Eddie Glaude is the editor and founder of the fantastic Substack you all have to subscribe to, the Native Son, professor at Princeton, and also the author of several books. And I've invited him because you all won't listen to me. Maybe you listen to Professor Eddie Glaude. And I've been following his tweets. And we have a lot to talk about. So I've given you a lot, Professor. We could spin the wheel. Zoran, ICE, the war in Iran, Mahmoud Khalil. Where do you want to begin? Doot, 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 doot.
So first of all, I want to begin by thanking you for doing all the things that you do, for continuing to tell the truth in an unashamed way. I mean, you're just extraordinary in the way in which you can hold the line in some ways. But I want to start with the New York City election. I think Mondani's election suggests that these labels that have in so many ways organized our political life just simply don't map on to the electorate anymore. I think
Mm,
that's the first thing I want to say, that we find ourselves fighting on the battlefield of the 19th century. Or you're a socialist, or you're a communist, or you're liberal, these sorts of things, when in fact people are much more complicated than these sort of shorthands. And we see
yep.
this playing out over and over again, and we see it playing out particularly within the Democratic Party. And I want to say this, because before I get to what's, to
Yeah,
me,
take your time.
what's so insidious about this election, is that since World War II, since the advent of Hitler, since the Cold War, the Democratic Party has found itself trying to do two things at once: hold off fascism and hold off communism, or its left wing, right?
Yep.
And so there's this ongoing battle. How do we fight Hitler and how do we fight Stalin? And what that has translated into, how that's translated over the years, is how do we hold off Republicans and how do we hold off the quote unquote left wing of the Democratic Party?
Yep.
And when we think about Bernie Sanders, and we think these folk, they describe themselves as democratic socialists in ways, but they're closer to Mondale than they are to some communist, party member in the Soviet Union, of the old Soviet Union. But here we are, still fighting this battle and still witnessing the Democratic Party holding the view that it has to, in some ways, contain its left wing, kind of suppress it, right? To demonize it. Because in so many ways, a lot of folk, even within the party, Democratic Party itself, they're more comfortable with racist fascist than they are with, right, leftists who want to, in some ways, have an economy that doesn't rely on the on the disposability of people. Now, you combine that with, Brother Watcha, you combine that with the insidious nature of racism that drove so much of this election. The idea that James Clyburn could come and
Mm,
endorse Cuomo, right? And we know who Cuomo is. I mean, you don't have to go through the Me Too movement. We know who this guy is. And they would rather settle, right, for a sexual predator
Yep.
than for a person who's trying to really fundamentally, right, address the most vulnerable in us is just unconscionable to me. And then you combine that with the idea that what he has to respond to is like from the river to the sea, as if that describes him as an anti-Semite, or he has to in some ways bow down to Benjamin Netanyahu and the policies of Israel in order to be a legitimate candidate. We have to begin to interrogate what's driving this politics, it seems to me. And I think you've been doing this in a very powerful way, but I just wanted to underline it as the
Please.
beginning of our conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And people might say, "Oh, well, Jihad, you're Muslim, you're brown skinned, you're bearded, much like Zoran. You're overplaying it. You're too sensitive." And something that I've been trying to underline and unpack and connect the dots ever since the War on Terror, when I was 21 years old as a senior at UC Berkeley, who then joined the war movement, and we were on the right side of history, but at that time, no one wanted to hear us. And I saw the combination of racism and Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry because it's all racism, folks, at the end of the day, right? It starts with anti-Black racism against Native Americans, against Mexicans, against Asians, against transgender folks, against undocumented immigrants. It's the same story, it just gets rebooted. And under the auspices of the war on terror and fighting the axis of evil, us versus them, we had, Eddie, you remember this, the Patriot Act. And people said that's fine. And we had the creation of ICE, and people said that's fine. And we had people forfeiting their civil liberties and freedoms for the feeling of safety. And people said that's fine because you're going against who? The Arabs and the Muslims, right? And we said, a lot of us, that okay, at this current moment, you're perfectly fine, but these weapons will be used against you in the future. And they said, no, it won't. It'll just be used against the sleeper cells and the terrorists and the Al Qaeda's and the ISIS and the Muslims and the Arabs. And I give you ICE being unleashed and terrorized against innocent American communities. I give you Donald Trump, a white supremacist president, using Islamophobia and racism. He was the one who championed the birther conspiracy against Barack Hussein Obama. He was the one that America chose to, if you will, steward this country after Barack Obama, speaking about white lash, right? Donald Trump was the one who ran on the Muslim man. That's what gave him the traction. Right after Ben Carson was the first one who went on it, and then Donald Trump put it on steroids. The first thing that Donald Trump did, or rather, we should say Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon did in the first week of office, you all remember? The Muslim ban, which failed
Right.
because it was done in such a sloppy way. It's all connected. And Zoran Mamdani and the racism that Eddie's talking about, folks, pay attention to the past 2 weeks. It is disgusting. Andrew Cuomo is a predator. Andrew Cuomo is corrupt. Andrew Cuomo was kicked out of the DNC. People who criticized him were people like Clyburn. And then Cuomo and the Democratic establishment leaned in so hard, calling in favors that Bill Clinton used up whatever was left of his legacy to go for Cuomo. Clinton, Lawrence Summers, the New York Times, Michael Bloomberg, the CEO of Palantir, Clyburn, Richie Torres, just because a Zoran Mamdani could win. And a Zoran Mamdani said what, Eddie? The rich should pay their taxes. I'm for the tenants, not the landlords. I want to make life more affordable. I'm a Muslim. And when it came to holding the line on Palestine, just like many of us kept saying, it was against the genocide and the double standard. And I'm glad you mentioned this because I mentioned this briefly with Francesca. I think it's lost on people. You're a black man, you know this. As a Muslim man, I see with Zoran, it happens with black people all the time. The double standard, Eddie, the question that Zoran was made to answer, the litmus test, the gauntlet to prove that he was, even Colbert went out of his way. I don't know if you saw that interview.
Yes.
And
Yes.
just talk to us about that because people might think I'm being too sensitive. The double standards that Zoran had to go through to prove his moderation that no other candidate had to go through. You also saw it with Obama. You saw it with Kamala Harris. I give it to you.
No, I think that's absolutely right. No one asked any question about the nature of Israel's genocidal acts in Gaza. No one really wanted to ask the other candidates about their position in relation to Gaza, right? In so many ways, it was kind of prove that you are not one of them to us, right? Prove that you're not a radical in inverted commas, right? Because we think your policies, we think that label, right, suggests that you are in fact radical. And so
Mm.
part of what we always find ourselves having to do is in so many ways. And I want to say this, that when we talk about Islamophobia, when we talk about white supremacy, and we talk about these positions in relation to these various groups, the through line is
Yeah.
the notion of whiteness.
Yeah.
The through line is the notion of what, who's considered one of us and who's considered other, and how might that other be described and accounted for. And in accounting for that other with a capital O, we need to make sure that you're safe,
Mm,
that you have in so many ways assented to the terms of your acceptance. And
mm,
what Mdani kind of confounded them in some ways, right? Is that he refused to play the game. Right? I think he held the line in this regard, right? That is to say, you can condemn October 7th, you can condemn violence, right? And you can condemn the horrific murder. I mean, we can use genocide as a legal term, but the mass murder that's going on in Gaza, we can condemn, right? What Netanyahu has been doing in relation to Iran, in relation to the Middle East. We can condemn all of that and not conflate, right? That critique with anti-Semitic kind of commitments. No, that has nothing to do with Jewishness. It has something to do with the policies of the state of Israel. You can reject the idea that there is something called a Jewish state. When I'm old enough to know, I'm old enough to remember that the idea of the two-state solution was the standard kind of response. And then the radical position was one state. But it was
yeah.
not a state that was Jewish. It was a state that had equal rights for everyone. I can't We can tell a story about how the notion of a Jewish state of Israel became common parlance and accepted, because at some point, particularly in the 80s, it wasn't. It
Yep.
wasn't. And so I know I'm rambling a bit, but I think it's really important. I think it's really important that we are repeatedly asked to make it clear that we are safe, that we are safe, that we are one of them and not
Mm.
one of the others. And if you don't pass that litmus test, or if you fail to continue to live up to it, you could be banished from view. You could be banished from the public sector, or you can be, um, um, shall we say, treated with such a kind of vile treatment, as it were, that it could endanger you and your family.
And I think it's important, and it is a through line because you mentioned this going back full circle that Democrats are okay, and so much of this country is okay in mainstreaming, normalizing, or moderating some of the most vile, extremist, racist, quasi-fascist white voters, right? Gavin Newsom, before Donald Trump turned the cannons on him through ICE, what did he do? He platformed Charlie Kirk. He platformed Steve Bannon. Democrats wanted the Joe Rogan of the left. They can't stand a Zohran Mamdani, but you know what? Let's have a warmonger, Adam Kinzinger, at the DNC, not a Palestinian. Let's have Adam Kinzinger. And folks, he showed his true colors just a couple of days ago. Adam Kinzinger, who so many Democrats love so much, these rhino, never Republican white dudes, right? Let's bear hug him and let's bear hug the Cheneys. And did you see Adam Kinzinger when it came to war in Iran? Hey, this was fantastic. Adam Kinzinger. I might not agree with Donald Trump, but I agree with him on this. And that take was about as fresh as milk in the 106-degree New York sun, right? Uh, all their Imperial war boners came out. David Frum, have you seen Frum?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, the one good news is the world's worst people had the world's worst sleep last night. Just look at the racism. Just look at it. Look openly. They're just losing their minds, right? Just Charlie Kirk, the viciousness talking about because Zohran Mamdani wins, now there's going to be global jihad, intifada. I mean, folks, listen. Just how they literally just sweep us and generalize us and see us as the other, right? Zohran Mamdani is an American, the son of African South Asian immigrants, and he's a Muslim, has a Muslim name. He's not Palestinian, he's not Arab, doesn't matter. They call it the global intifada, Hamas, Hezbollah. A Muslim is an Arab, is a terrorist, is a Palestinian, is an ISIS, is an Al Qaeda. Do you see how it all works, folks? Yeah. Why? Because you ain't white. And so you have to play the game. You have to be good Muslim, bad Muslim. Now, who talked about this dichotomy? Who talked about oh, this litmus test that all people of color have to go through. Kamala Harris had to go through it. Barack Hussein Obama had to go through it, right? All people of color had to go through. Mamdani's own father, Professor Mamdani, who wrote this fantastic book. I mean, The Way the World Works, Eddie. It's a great book that I read as a young man 20 years ago. He wrote this book called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim.
Mhm.
Eddie, do you want to unpack that?
No, no,
Because it could be good black, it could be good black, good woman, bad woman, good gay, bad gay. It's the same.
the way in which I render this, and you're so right in everything that you just laid out. Um, is that we all have to face the temptation of the bribe. And what's the bribe? The bribe is that you adjust yourself to an unjust world, right? That you take in the benefits of being quiet in relation to the injustice that surrounds you. That you mute or quiet your voice, right, in relation to the history of the country, in relation to its present. And so I think it's really important for us to understand. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, because it's a hard binary that either you're good or you're bad, either you're a sellout or you're a radical. Human beings are complicated. This is where we began. Human beings are making choices all the time.
Mhm.
And just because you're a person of color or you have a different religious orientation or religious set of commitments or sexual orientation, it doesn't mean that you're any less complex. Human beings are what they are. And so when you reduce someone to simply their Muslim identity or to their racial identity, you often misdescribe who they are. Because you can have Muslims who are rich, who are actually more identified with their wealth than they are with their religion. You can
Or
have
their
black
whiteness.
are there what? You could have black folk, right, who are much more concerned with heteronormative politics than they are with the question of racial justice. I mean, we can, or they collides with it in some ways. And so part of what I'm trying to suggest is that we all face, right, this demand, right, to make it, Baldwin, let me use a Baldwin quote, which is always fun. He says this in Many Thousands Gone. I must make my face blank. He said, I must make my face blank in order to wash away your guilt.
Mm,
I have
mm.
to, in some ways, the precondition for my entree into the circles of power is that I have to leave the particularity of who I am at the door. Right? I have to wash my face blank in order to be accepted. And so we see that demand, and when it's not met, you're castigated, you vilify, you're attacked, right? And then you combine that with a politics that centers the least of these, the most vulnerable, that wants the wealthy, the uber rich to pay their fair share, to have an idea of government that's in the service of particular values as opposed to a government in the service of the uber rich. Oh my God, then you're a real serious threat at that point, right? And now you're
Such
the mayor of the largest, you have the potential to be the mayor of the largest city in the United States. Oh my God, people's heads are exploding.
It's, I mean, exploding, folks. And my fear is, I mean, if you look at the reaction, the overblown reaction to Mamdani's win, which by the way was a historic seismic win. I don't want people to sleep on that win because the entire establishment came out to destroy Mamdani. The Democratic Party saw where the winds were blowing, saw where the people were, and said, should we join it? No, let's crush it. And they tried their best. Bill Clinton came out, folks. Lauren Summers came out, right? New York Times came out. Bloomberg came out. Clyburn. They called in Clyburn because you know why? They said, Clyburn, the blacks. We can get the blacks. And the blacks and the Muslims and the Latinos said, nah, we'll go with Mamdani, right? And they went for Cuomo of all. They would rather have a predator, a corrupt predator, and burn the town down than have a Mamdani and what he represents, folks. So when people like Eddie and me say that racism, that need for conformity to wealth and whiteness is real, I give you this race. I give you this race. And I'm going to connect the dots to also Mahmoud Khalil and the
Yeah.
Palestine because it's all connected. But that Baldwin quote that you just said, how essentially the rest of us have to forfeit our own individuality, our own dignity, and our voice to make whiteness feel comfortable. I'm so glad that you shared this poll, which I've been trying to share just a couple of days ago, folks. White men are, quote, walking around on eggshells at work, afraid to speak freely, according to a survey.
What are they afraid to say? I mean, this is the thing. What are they afraid to say? The question, I mean, look, we find ourselves in a moment where things are shifting. This new generation of folks, they understand. We can call. I like to describe them in moments when I'm, uh, 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 shall we say, trying to figure out what's happening with us. They're the catastrophic generation.
Mm.
They've come of age in the midst of cascading catastrophes. They know the country is broken, and
Yep.
so the idea, the idea that we have to, in so many ways, concede to the world as it is, right? When in fact they are trying to figure out who we're going to be. And we're going to make some mistakes in this moment, but this is the analogy I've used, Jack. This is the analogy I've used. Imagine Jim Crow collapsing. It's
Okay.
falling apart. Racial segregation in the South is falling apart, and people are running around complaining because they can't say the N word and call old men boys anymore, or older women, black women, aunties anymore.
Mm.
They're complaining that these people are walking on the same sidewalk that they're walking on, right? And what do we do? Now, mind you, there were these moments where there were these collisions. Violence actually broke out, but these folk had to freaking adjust. They couldn't go around calling people the N-word in public anymore, although now the situation has changed in so many ways, right? So part of what these folk are saying is that I can't inhabit all of my prejudices in public anymore. These people dare to hold me to account, and they clutch their freaking pearls. I said freaking, I was going to say something else. They clutch their freaking pearls because they can't be themselves in front of us anymore. And then you say, well, and when I asked the question, what pray tell can't you say? The comments were on X were rife with exactly what I'm talking about. Evidence exhibit A, as it were, and B, and C.
Especially on X, especially on Twitter. And Cheryl and I think retweeted someone. I don't know who said this, but it was such a good point. And she says, I think it was and she is usually very diplomatic but blunt, but even she came out with the boo hoo hoo essentially. And I think it was a black individual who said, "Oh, really? Do you know what black people have to do? We can't say anything. We have to perform 24/7 at work." Speaking about policing ourselves, welcome to our life. Can you talk to us about that? How people of color in America have to consistently police themselves not to be too angry. Guy, folks, it goes back full circle. Look at Zohran Mamdani. Has to smile. He's being asked the most humiliating questions. Can't be upset. Barack Obama could never lose his temper, right? But Donald Trump, if he loses his temper and he said the F word, like he did yesterday because he's spiraling out of control and can't control the ceasefire because he's an idiot, then his base goes keeping it real, shooting from the hip. Can you imagine if Obama did that? Could you imagine if Obama just kept it real? That famous Chappelle skit, keeping it real when keeping it real goes wrong. Go back and watch it. It's still very topical. But no, tell us about people of color, Eddie, and how we have to always police ourselves. What we were talking about 10 minutes ago comes back full circle.
Absolutely. I mean, Paul Laurence Dunbar about the mask, right? I mean, Langston Hughes. We are always finding ourselves over and over again, right? Having to mute ourselves, right, as a condition for entree, right? You have to quiet yourself in so many ways because if we're too loud in the way we inhabit space, right, we make people uncomfortable. Right? Our rage, our anger can't be expressed in a certain sort of way. Our joys can't even be expressed in a certain way. Ralph Ellison wrote a wonderful essay about laughing barrels in the South, where black folk couldn't laugh out loud; they had to stick their head in barrels. Right.
Mm.
So there's and again, you can trace that particular that impulse to the critique of Kamala Harris's her laughter. In some ways, it was too outward expressive. It was too expressive in some ways. Right. Think about you speaking in your own language. What happens if you pray in public? We just saw right these images of folk trying to pray in Times Square, folk wanting to walk over the prayer rugs, right? I mean, so all of this stuff, what does it mean to signal your difference in public spaces? And how does that have to be policed? Right? So we wear the mask, and that mask not only impacts how we live, the stress that comes with it, right? It also, right, centers a kind of dishonesty in our public life because we're not dealing with each other, right? in a direct way because we're not being honest about who we are when we engage each other in the public space. So there's always the simmering simmering ugliness underneath our politics that bubbles up and now is in full view, right? Because Donald Trump represents that ugliness in a very clear and decisive way, it seems to me.
No, and folks, if you think we're just making this up, I want you to take it to the brosphere and the manosphere and YouTube, many of these comedians who openly said, we can finally say the R word now. We can finally say retard and we can finally say gay. We brought it back. You think I'm joking? I'm not. That's their win. That we can finally say retard and gay again, right? People like Andrew Schultz and others. So they're willing to trade their democracy, their freedoms, their rights for the ability to say the things that they could no longer say in public, which was no, not speaking about the 1%, not speaking about greed, not speaking about tyranny. No, no, no. What they really wanted to say was retard and gay. And what they really want to say, Professor Glaude, you know, and I know this is going to be some dark humor, some very dark humor. But I've said, okay, if we could let white people say the N word publicly again, would they give us free health care? Would they give us Medicare for all? I know it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. But I always, you know what? I know America, folks. Think about it. If you say, all right, white folks, if we give you the N word and you could say it in hip hop songs, only in hip hop, when you're reciting lyrics of hip hop songs only, you could say the N word out loud. What will you give us? What do you think they'd give us, Eddie? I think they'd give us Medicare for all.
I don't think they would give us anything. You know what they would give us if they could say the N word? They would give what because the N word represents right the dehumanization of folk.
Yeah.
They would begin to try to reach back for something else, right, from the
There,
old days, right? So as to use Adam Server's language, right? They want to resegregate the damn society. They'll use it as the point of entry to resegregate the whole damn society again.
think
But I
they
wanted
do
to
a
say
rope a
this.
dope. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
but I
do.
wanted to
Yeah.
say this though, that the through line to our conversation, right, is a kind of a sense of who this country is, right? What they believe America actually represents. And when I say they, those people who hold this position.
I lost you. I lost you.
What I'm trying to suggest here, no. Part of what I'm trying to suggest here, right, is that this view of the country, right, is destroying it. Its insistence on thinking of itself as a white republic in the vein of old Europe is destroying it. It's getting in the way of us really discovering who we really are. Right. And this is at the heart of, right. I think it's a through line that connects us to the imperial policies vis-a-vis
Yep.
Iran. Connects us to Mahmoud. Mahmoud Khalil. It is a through line. We refuse, right. And I say we as in an aspirational kind of way. We refuse to discover who we actually are.
Yep.
And all hell breaks loose because of it.
And speaking about the through line and what we're comfortable with, the DNC would rather platform Adam Kinzinger, who voted with Donald Trump. Folks, I keep the receipts more than 90% of the time. And yes, he critiqued Donald Trump. I'm glad for it. But then he just had his war boner, right? They would rather have the Liz Cheneys. They would rather have Leon Panetta because, the kids were raging for Leon Panetta. Then a Palestinian speaker. And speaking about not seeing each other, they saw that their base was not just Muslims and Arabs. We now have the YouGov poll, Eddie, where a majority of Democrats, the reason why they stayed home was because of the Biden administration's complicity in a genocide. Right now, that doesn't mean Kamala would have won, but it would have narrowed her loss, and she barely lost, folks, which makes it that much more painful. But the Democratic establishment, even though their own base was saying, just the bar is so, look how low the bar was, folks. They said the following: just have a Palestinian speaker. You had Rose Goldberg Poland, the mother of the Israeli hostage. Unfortunately, the hostage passed away, who gave a beautiful speech. You said everyone said that was beautiful, humane, warm. She talked about everyone, even in her pain. She was empathetic. Think about this, Eddie. Right after she spoke, you have a Palestinian mother. You have her deliver the same type of message, and then they hold hands. What I mean, that's the lane was wide open, and the Democratic Party said no, f you, shut up, stay in your lane. and we're not even going to acknowledge a Palestinian, right? This happened, folks. I know Democrats hate hearing it. And because of the genocide and Biden administration, folks, I know people hate hearing this. The Biden administration gave a green light to Netanyahu. Netanyahu would not be able to do what he did in Iran if it wasn't for Biden. I'm sorry, people don't like it. He was emboldened for the past year and a half. And he said, okay, no one's going to stop me. So let me preemptively, which is unilaterally, strike Iran. Who's going to stop me, right? And of course, Trump is also complicit. But the Democrats went along with it. And people forget this. The Democrats went along with the genocide. The Democrats went along with the crackdown and dehumanization of Palestinians who could not even say free Palestine. If you said free Palestine in law firms, if you said free Palestine in a lot of these in universities, you know this. What happened? What's happening to you right now? Mahmoud Khalil, folks, when he was detained, ADL came out on March 9th and said, good, this is what should happen. They took Mahmoud Khalil, who is a father, married to a Palestinian citizen, a man who's committed zero crimes, a pro-Palestinian activist, and just like they did with Zohran Mamdani, called him Hamas, called him an extremist, right? And go back and look at the receipts, folks. And March 9th, look what ADL said, applauding him. This man spent 104 days in detention. He shouldn't have spent a single day in detention, right? Should be an outrage. And Mahmoud Khalil went in detention. Democrats didn't say a word. They didn't. Very few. Then what happened? Rumeza Oster was kidnapped off the streets. Very few people said a word, right? Then what happened? Badr Suri Khan, right, in Georgetown, kidnapped off the streets. His crime, married to a Palestinian. And then what happened? Immigrants, right? I started terrorizing them. And then finally, because Chris Van Hollen and a few other people had the courage to lead with their values, Chris Van Hollen went to El Salvador, said, I'm not going to leave until I get proof of life of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It was in the news, Eddie. Because it was in the news, people started caring about it. Because the polls went up in favor of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Democrats then, people forget, right after Van Hollen went and visited Kilmar Garcia, then you had Democrats visit Rumeza Osterk and Mahmoud Khalil in the Louisiana Detention Center. And Mahmoud Khalil, after 104 days, was released. Am I out of pocket here?
No, no, not at
I'm just
all.
trying my best, folks.
Those are just the facts. Those are just the facts. And see, this is really important. And it connects to where we began. It's not sufficient in this moment to just simply deride Donald Trump. You're not going to mobilize people simply to hold off MAGA Republicans, right? That's the argument can't just be in the negative. You have to give voice to your values. You have to live those values. You have to enact them. You just can't simply say, if you don't elect us, look at the alternative, because that's what happens. They say, no, sit down, shut up, go
Yep.
away, and then expect you to turn out and vote every single election cycle for them. It makes no sense politically. The only thing you can do is to say, we're going to take our base for granted while we go, as we've been doing since 1980, to attract the lover who rejected us, the Reagan Democrat, the silent majority. Those are the people we really care about. The rest of you, you know your place, and you know you have to vote for us because the other side is full of rabid racists. It's true. Of course they are. But what do you do when the party that takes you for granted
Mm.
embraces policies and people that signal to you that your life isn't as valued as other folk, that they embrace policies that in so many ways tinker around the edges of your suffering, that
Mm.
really don't address the core issues at the heart of the country. So look, we're in a moment where we're facing a fascist threat.
Yes.
No doubt about it. Trumpism is what it is. We know the MAGA Republicans aren't committed to democracy in any robust way, and we
Nope.
have to defeat them. But we cannot fall back on this old strategy where we began, that we have to defeat the fascist and we have to defeat the leftist because there's no difference between the two. That is bullshit. It has always been bullshit, and it is still bullshit. Excuse my language.
No, do I have you at least for 10 minutes, Eddie?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. And I want to connect the dots here, and I hope this has been helpful to people because what Eddie said, folks, and I'm bringing it back to the war on terror, I'm bringing it back to Palestine because you think it's not connected, but it's all connected. When it came to the 2024 election, this is what the Democratic Party said: shut up, shut up and get in line. Shut up and get in line because it's either us or Trump. And you're not gonna vote for Trump, the racist. So I know you're talking about Palestine. I know you were talking about the 1%. I know you want to talk about taxing the rich, but you shut your mouth. You shut your mouth, and we're gonna have moderated steps towards progress. And we're gonna punt on immigration. And not only are we gonna punt on immigration, we're gonna support the Republicans as they crack down on immigrants. We're going to pass the Laken Riley Act with the Democratic support in the Senate and the House because the polls show us that we're weak on security. So we're going to be just as tough on the immigrants. And we're going to say F you to the Palestinians. And we're not going to stand on conviction because you can't say Palestine. So we're not even going to have a Palestinian speak at the DNC, even though our base is begging us for the lowest bar on earth. And guess what? When it comes to the 2025 mayoral election at NYC, shut up. Shut your mouth. F you. You vote for Cuomo. We're telling you to vote for Cuomo. Even though you see the entire groundswell for Mamdani, we're not going to have a Mamdani. We're going to have a Cuomo. And you shut your mouth. And then you see the war with Iran, right? The war with where's Schumer? Where's Hakeem Jeffries? Where's the leadership? You have an open lane, Eddie. You have an open lane, and you cannot have the Democratic Party even come up with a consistent message in the past 2 weeks, folks. Clearly, according to all the polls, no one wants war. 85% of people voted at at the YouGov poll a couple of days ago. War with Iran. 85% said no. 85%. Yesterday, CBS and CNN came out their polls, not with the war, but the strikes. Trump's strikes on Iran. A majority said no, even to the strikes. All right. Here's the wide open lane. And then Hakeem Jeffries 2 days ago was asked, I'm not making this up. Go back and look at the clip. Hey, Representative Jeffries, have you got it? What do you think about the bipartisan bill supported by Representative Massey and Ro Khanna that is asking Congress to authorize the war because the strike is illegal? You know what Hakeem Jeffries said? I haven't gone around to a next question.
I I mean, I was left speechless. And let me be clear. I think remember I began by talking about how complex we are.
Yeah.
I've worked with the Biden administration. I've worked with Kamala Harris's campaign. I've engaged Hakeem Jeffries, right? But this is what do you mean?
Yep.
I mean, so part of what I'm trying to suggest here is that we try to make pragmatic decisions, and we're trying to introduce language into the political discourse in ways that could open up space for a different kind of political imagination, as it were. And then you have this, and you kind of go, "What is going on?" There are moments when one's values are in clear view. There are moments when events happen in the world, and where you stand or how you respond to those events reflect the state of your soul.
Mm,
How is it? And you correct me if I'm wrong. In my adult life, I can't remember a time when the U.S. was not at war.
nope. Especially with brown folks, especially in the
That's,
Middle East, not my life.
I mean, we can call the roll, right? I just can't remember a time. What does it mean? No matter what your ideology may be, but morally or ethically, what does it mean for you to be exhausted by the drumbeat of war? And what does it suggest that the leader of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives, who's one step away from the speakership, the speaker's gavel, who would be in the line of succession, will say, I haven't read the damn bill?
Literally, he said that, folks. Haven't gone around to it. Don't have
I
the
mean,
time.
one can only infer from that a certain set of commitments.
Mm.
And that's what we have to do. What are those commitments? Why are you silent with regards to this issue? And what is your relationship to the state of Israel that would lead you to be silent in relation to these issues? And it's a question that isn't driven by anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish behavior. It's driven by an earnest and sincere curiosity. What is your relationship to that political entity such that you will quiet your voice in relation to this particular issue? You will cede the authority of Congress in this instance. Doesn't make any damn sense to me.
You could probably follow the money trail. That's one, but it is just a failure of leadership, folks, which is why I keep saying that these individuals, and I've been saying it for a while, Jeffries, Schumer, others, the establishment, that's what I mean by the establishment. They're not made for this moment. They're not built for this fight. I give you the past 2 weeks. The lane is wide open to be an anti-war party, and they still fail. And they still fail. And then I want to end on this because I want to talk about what's happening to immigrants in this country and what's happening to the undocumented immigrants and how the establishment kept punting. Democrats kept punting on immigration year after year after year. They kept punting because they didn't want to be seen as weak, right? Because they were looking at the polls and, oh no, this is the one issue that Donald Trump is strong on. So instead of leading on values and by conviction, they said, we'll just be complicit and vote for the Lake and Riley Act. We'll allow the undocumented to be thrown under the bus, right? We'll allow the right to misappropriate the word woke as a weapon, and then we'll use that same badge fake weapon against our own voters. I'm talking about Elisa Slotkin, the centrist that the Democratic Party is trying to promote, right? Who says we have to have a war, her words, on the weak and the woke. That's the Democrat that the Democratic establishment wants to promote, right? And we kept saying that you ignore the war on terror, okay. You ignore the attack on transgender, all right. You ignore the war on the documented immigrants. Guess what? And it's a point that you just said. I'm so glad you made it. That once you give them the R word, the G word, gay, retarded, the N word, they'll take more and more and more. They're coming after everyone. So transgender, throw them under the bus. Palestinians, throw them under the bus. Undocumented, throw them under the bus. And then I give you Senator Padilla. They saw a brown man and they went to work. Then I give you Brad Lander running for mayor, a white passing Jewish man. He asked simply for a warrant and they went to work. Then I give you Gavin Newsom in the state of California. It wasn't enough that he bent the knee. They went to work with the military, ICE, and now the National Guard. You folks, I'm using this word on purpose, terrorizing innocent Americans. They picked up a pregnant woman. They're picking up citizens. They're going after union leaders. They're unleashed on Home Depots, on 7-Elevens. They're going to schools, folks, right? I talked to, if you saw that video I did with folks in LA, Francesca and a few others, Jess Craven, they're on the ground. They're saying the community feels terrorized, right?
Mhm.
And you don't see Democrats coming out in favor of immigration reform, speaking for immigrants, right? Because that would be bad. And the one thing I really appreciate about Zohran is sink or swim, he stayed true to his values. Sink or swim, he stayed true to workers, immigrants, people of color, against the 1% of Palestinians. Sink or swim. And isn't this, I'm sorry, but Democrats, you had a wide open lane and you kept throwing us under the bus. And the person you talked about, the Reagan Democrat, I have a name for him, Eddie. It's in my mind. It's the real American who drinks real coffee in the Rust Belt. I call him Chet. They still go for Chet instead of Latoya and Eddie and Jose, right? Can you talk to us about that? Because I feel like had they just led, even now, had they just led with values, immigrants are people. We're going to fight for immigrants, damn it. Enough is
Exactly.
enough. And they still
Exactly.
don't. Look, did it keep them safe? Did it keep them safe? Nope. ICE came after them at the end of the day because fascists come after everyone. Sorry for my rant, Eddie.
No, 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 because you're just speaking truth. Bars, bars, you're speaking bars. No, because I think it's really important. And one way we can account for this is that this ongoing strategy of triangulation, trying to take the Republican issue and make it your own in order to attract the Chet and his family and his folk and his cohort, right? So there is this ongoing sense, right? How can I no, let me put it this way. The idea of the third way, this new Democrat, has the Democratic Party by the throat. It is not an orientation that is consonant for this moment, right? And so we don't need Republican light anymore. We don't need the Democratic Party to be filled with Rockefeller Republicans, right? We need a different way of thinking about the country. And the way we get to that is to be explicit about what we value. What are the values that animate our way of life? And if we take these people at their word across party lines, we see that the Venn diagram shows that there's more overlap in ways that are troubling than we initially thought. So I think at the end of the day, we need to say that finally, Clintonism or third wave or New Democrat, we need to
Abundance,
throw
that's a new one. Abundance.
we need to throw that into the trash bin. And that doesn't mean we have to, become socialist or whatever the latest shorthand will be. It means that we need to articulate a set of values that affirm the dignity and standing of every human being, no matter their zip code, their color, their gender, right? Whatever, right? Their ability and the like. We need to uh, uh, assert that every human being should have in the United States, across the globe, should have housing, should have decent health care, should have a living wage. These are values that aren't reducible to ideologies, right? I'm not in the damn 19th century. We aren't. We don't have to fall under these labels. We're too complex for that, right? So part of what I think we have to do is to relentlessly critique the residual traces of this iteration of the Democratic Party that was part of the fertilizer that gave us Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans in the first damn place.
Right. That's right. And you know what, folks? Be bold and imagine. It's okay to imagine a better future and to fight for it. And I think that's why, in part, Mamdani won. He imagined something else. He imagined something better. Why can't tenants have more rights? Why can't the rich pay their taxes? Why can't immigrants be free in this country? Why can't Palestinians be free? Why can't the grassroots come together and take on the corporate establishment? And what did they say? Impossible. And he pulled it off yesterday. He pulled it off. So what they want is a failure of imagination to go back and retrench us to something that was never beautiful or great for the rest of us, right? They want restoration, and what we want is reformation. It's time. It's time. Time. And I kept Eddie. Eddie is doing good work. He's being a good son. I didn't want to keep him for this long, but when I get Eddie on, I feel like I'm not crazy or alone. MSNBC still has him on, which I'm so happy. So I think they've blacklisted me and a few others, but Eddie's on and he's able to convey this message to the mainstream. And Eddie does it also via his books, which are fantastic, and also his Substack, which is Native Son. What did I miss, Eddie? Please shamelessly promote yourself. How can
No,
people support you? How can people follow you and elevate your voice?
I think what they can do is follow what you just laid out, not with regards to me, but to imagine, this place in a much more expansive way. All the self promotion, a native son, but what we need is for everyone to hunker down and to do the hard work of fundamentally transforming this country. And that, to me, is all that is. That's why all of this stuff is worthwhile.
Yeah, and it's also for my kids, right? I'm at that age. Folks, I have less years ahead of me than behind me, which is fine. But I got three kids, and they and their generation deserves better. And the very least, we can imagine it, and we could fight for that better future, inshallah, as we say. Folks, this has been the Left Hook. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to have another young media maven who's imagining a better future, Kat Abu Ghazaleh, who's running for office in Illinois, talk about taking on the Democratic establishment and talking about her thoughts to what's happening, especially with Zohran Mamdani's win and the war in Iran, and also when it comes to Palestinian freedom. She is, believe it or not, Palestinian American. The Left Hook is free. I have no paywalls. You pay what you can. So please support Eddie doing great work. Please support, at the very least, subscribe to the Native Son. For the nearly 1,000 people who joined us, we've been speaking for about 50 minutes. My bad. I wanted to keep Eddie for 30 minutes, but I get greedy with Eddie. And we're going to have the entire conversation up in about an hour. So if you missed it, don't worry. You can watch the entire conversation. Eddie dropped gems as he always does. I strongly recommend going back and listening to this conversation. There's going to be a full transcript, and that will be out on the Left Hook and Native Son. Until the next time we join, if you can, join me in 10 minutes. But if you can't, stay kind, be good, be empathetic, and remember, please don't be a fascist. Eddie, enjoy your family, sir. Thank you so much for making time. I really
Take
appreciate
care,
it,
Doc.
buddy.
Appreciate you.
Bye.
Bye bye.